And it's good to have your company. We have this chat on a regular basis with two really important people, Professor Georgina Long and Professor Richard Scolyer from the Melanoma Institute. And the reason we have the chat is because we are the world leader when it comes to melanoma. And we've spoken about it before, about how things formerly were terminal, not the case anymore. Early detection, we keep talking about that, checking your skin and all the rest of it. So recently, I'm contacted by the Melanoma Institute to tell me that Professor Scolyer, an absolute genius when it comes to melanoma, is diagnosed with a brain cancer. And if you watched A Current Affair last night, as I did with Ali, you would have seen the professor there, bravely telling his story and bravely talking about the battle he confronts with the worst possible brain cancer diagnosis, and how somehow with his dear friend and colleague Professor Georgina Long, they're going to utilise the lessons learnt in melanoma in some way to apply them to brain cancer, which is quite revolutionary and quite, I guess, mystifying that we could even think of that. But Richard has very, very kindly and generously offered himself, I guess, in this experimental series to try and find answer, not just for people that were battling melanoma, but also battling brain cancer. And normal circumstances, it's a really joyous occasion to see my two friends here, but it's in completely different circumstances. I don't want to be melancholy, I don't want to be sad, but I firstly want to congratulate you, Richard, on your braveness and the way that you've just thrown yourself into this after that diagnosis. You were overseas, I think I heard last night, in Poland or thereabouts?
Yeah, that's right, Ray. I was lecturing at a conference there that was put on by a mate who works at Harvard, and I'd done a day's lecture. The next day walked up to some mountains, and day after that had a seizure, and that's how this thing got discovered.
And I guess it hit you like a bit of 4x2, just saying, well...
Out of the blue. Before that, I felt normal.
No signs, nothing at all?
No signs or symptoms whatsoever, even in retrospect.
Yeah. Is that normal that in this type of cancer that you don't get a warning, or is it something that's germane to this type of cancer?
50-50. Some patients would get some symptoms other than that, but for me,
like headaches, a bit of nausea, a bit of vomiting might precede a seizure. But actually, commonly people present the first time with brain cancer with a seizure and didn't really know. Yeah. And sometimes family members will say, "Oh yeah, they were a bit this and a bit that," but you can't really nail it. Generally, you just present like Richard did.
And Ray, you might think it's a bit, I was unlucky to have it overseas, but to be honest, in retrospect, it's panned out for me really well. It's made new opportunities that perhaps I wouldn't have got otherwise.
You are the eternal optimist. It's just amazing.
Well, he's right, because him being in Poland, I got the call Sunday morning. He had a seizure Saturday Poland time.
Right.
I got the call from his wife Sunday morning and immediately said, get me the scans, show me the scans.
Right.
And by Sunday night, we were able to utilise our own network. I mean, Poland, the University Hospital at Krakow was excellent, amazing.
Right. Yeah.
So we were sent the scans. Well, Katie, his wife, sent me the scans by, good old iPhone video. Yeah. I'd sent them on to our colleagues, our network of radiologists and our own neurosurgeon who does glioma but does melanoma as well, melanoma brain surgery. And by Saturday night, I have to say I was already starting to grieve because we knew what it was. Richard and the team over in Poland were still discussing. Richard knew in his heart whether it was a glioma or an encephalitis. But that enabled then me at the other end to start working and thinking about what can we do differently, because we knew it's certain. I mean, to be truthful, we didn't know how bad his brain cancer was until he had his biopsy. Normally you don't have a biopsy. You might have a burr hole biopsy, but Richard chose to have an open biopsy. You may want to explain why.
The reason why that made sense to me is that there's an opportunity to try and do more research on the tumour to understand what we could do to make therapies more effective, and I needed a bigger biopsy than just little core biopsies to be taken. So I guess a bit more risky, but yeah, 2 open biopsies was the way to go.
What it meant was we could plan a different strategy. The normal strategy, and just to explain, Richard's tumour, when we got that first biopsy, was the worst of the worst. So when you characterise a cancer, you send off the DNA, you do all these different things to it to try and work out how bad it is. He ticked the box for every worst kind. It's not survivable. It is not survivable. So, and you may have people listening who say, oh, I had a friend who had brain cancer and they're alive 10 years down. That's a different, I will tell you now, it's a different type of brain cancer. It might be an oligo, or it might be a lower grade thing, or it might be an astrocytoma, but it's not the glioblastoma grade 4, TERT promoter mutated, EGFR amplified, P10 deleted, IDH wild type, all the things that make it bad, Richard has.
Yeah.
So that gave us an opportunity to say, well, let's do things differently. We did the biopsy differently, and that's why we're doing it.
And when I think about in melanoma, Ray, we've transformed the disease on its head. For people whose melanoma had spread around their body, 15 years ago, less than 5% of people would be alive 5 years later. Now 50% of them are alive, and we think most of those people have been cured. So we've learnt some incredible things.
Okay, so you take your expertise in melanoma and you say, well,
give it a crack.
Let's have a crack. Let's see if we can do what we do with melanomas with this dire brain cancer. So how does that work in, I guess, plain English?
There are 4 outcomes. First of all, to talk about the standard treatment for Richard's type of tumour, it's been around for nearly 20 years, 18 years, and it has not changed.
Okay.
The only bit that's changed is a bit of the surgery and a bit of the radiotherapy. So they do surgery, they do radiotherapy, and they give chemotherapy with the radiotherapy, and that's it. It has not changed. The issue with this tumour, think of it like a fig tree. It's got a massive trunk, that's the bit you can see, and then it's got roots that just don't go 3 metres. You know those fig trees where they go like 400 metres across the oval, and then the oval at the drainage at the other side of the oval's not working? It's that sort of thing. So you can't just cut away the trunk and the roots you can see. You will never get to the end of it. Never. Unless you take the whole brain out.
Exactly. And you'll be a vegetable. So what's the point of doing that?
And then it recurs and you die anyway because it's 100% death rate with this subtype. So you've got to use the immune system to keep the normal brain cells alive and try and utilise other ways to just selectively kill the cancer cells. But these tumours are so heterogeneous, like they're all very different.
And that's what we've discovered in melanoma and been able to utilise, and now our knowledge of melanoma is applied to many other cancers. But when you think about it, in skin cancer, if you're Australian, you've got 1 in 2, 1 in 3 chance of getting skin cancer during your life. If you're a bloke, you've got 1 in 15 chance of getting a melanoma in your life. But for brain cancer, it's like 1 in 10,000 chance of getting it. So it's not such a common disease. So it's harder to do research. And it's inside this hard box, and there's not...
The skull, you mean?
In the skull, so you can't just get in there and get the tissue
My
out
definition
easily.
of hard box, here's a hard box, yours the skull.
But there's 4 outcomes for Richard. He could do worse than the standard. We know the standard will only work for a certain amount of time. He could do worse than that. He could do the same of that as the standard. He could do a little better than that, and there's a tiny chance he could be cured, but small.
Yeah, can I just add one other thing, Bray? You know, that it's often propagated that drugs don't cross the blood-brain barrier, and we know from our work in melanoma that that's not the case. And for my brain tumour already, we took a big biopsy, then our colleague Brenda Shivalingam removed the bulk of it, and we've been able to demonstrate that the drugs were in the tumour and they had a big effect on the types of immune cells that were in there and the number of them. So we don't know if it'll work, if that's going to have an effect clinically, but it certainly has made a difference.
Already. So there's, I guess, given, 1 in 10,000, given that the research hasn't changed for 18 years, as you said, Professor.
They're trying, but the treatment hasn't changed. Yeah.
So even in these early stages, there are things we didn't know that we do know now. Would that be correct to say that?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Well,
and the barriers that are often put up against glioma, one of the major barrier, it's in a skull, and the skull is a box, and any swelling or problems in the skull can cause a lot of neurological damage. So people are afraid to do things differently because they're worried that they'll cause worse outcomes and neurological problems for Richard that he may not have otherwise happened. But we have to be brave and courageous because you can't just keep cutting it out. You have to change the biology, and this is what Richard's doing.
I heard you last night talk on ACO about ethics, and that whatever you do what you do, you act within an ethical boundary. That but you've also just mentioned there that this man has bravely put himself in a position where things could be worse than they normally would be, with a slight chance they could be better. A slight chance. So
slight chance of cure, higher than slight chance of doing better.
Okay. So it's hard to quantify, Richard, but you're putting yourself in a position to help other people. And that's the bravest thing any person can do, really, it is. I mean, I just don't know if I'd have the courage to do what you're doing. I really don't. I don't know.
I think, Ray,
to be honest, I've dedicated my life to try and help people with cancer to change the field, and I'm incredibly proud with what Georgina and my team has done. And we've transformed melanoma and cancer care around the world, and it's part of who I am. It feels right.
But to expand on that a little bit, Ray, it's not done lightly. We spent,
I understand.
Richard, myself and Katie, Richard's wife, we spent hours and hours talking through the ins and outs of that. What does that mean for Richard? What if it did go worse? What does that look like? And we stared it in the face so that we knew this was completely and utterly driven by Richard and none of us. And you may want to comment on that.
I've written very long letters to support the medical team who are looking after me, that I understand those risks, and I'm taking that risk on board myself and responsibility for that.
Well, you've both done incredible things in relation to melanoma. We can only hope and pray you do incredible things with this particular brain cancer. And we're
backed by a wonderful scientific team. Amazing.
Well,
absolutely.
The crew you have, I mean, we punch well above our weights here in Australia on a whole range of fronts, whether it be MND, brain cancer, melanoma, a whole range of things. But this is one of the greatest acts of courage I've ever seen. And I mean that sincerely. I can't think of any circumstance, and you know, I've been with people who've battled and faced death and bravely done it, but I don't think I've ever confronted anyone that's doing what you're doing, Richard, and for that we should be eternally grateful, and not just to you, but to your wife and to your children who stand beside you as they did last night. You're a hell of a bloke. You're a really good fella, and what you've done for melanoma and Georgina, and what you said last night, Georgina, about your mates. You're not just colleagues. And it was interesting when we first started discussing melanoma, and because I knew Georgina Long through her dad and her family, and she said, no, if we're a package. If you get me in, you get Richard in, because that's how we've achieved the outcome we have with melanoma. We're a team. We're cohesive. We're together. And we do it together, and hence every conversation we've had has been together. And all I can do is hope and pray that we have the outcome that we're hoping for here, but come what may, it's just the greatest act of courage anyone could imagine, and I commend you for it.
Thanks, Ray.
You're a good man. You're a good man.
Very, very generous. For me, it doesn't seem like a choice. It seems like a no-brainer that this is the way to go.
Yeah. Anyway, people believe in prayer. Pray for Professor Scolyer and pray for his team. that will be supporting him through this, and pray for his wife and children. And let's just keep everything crossed and hope that we get the outcome that you so richly deserve.
Thanks so much, Ray.
Well,
thank you, Ray.
Thank you. You both propelled me to get a BCC fixed early this year with the aptly named Professor Jonathan Stretch, who's, I'll never forget it, when he first saw me, he said, what's this key? What's the
key flap.
Keystone flap.
Keystone flap. He said, keystone. He said, what? I said, what's that? Because it's on the back of my shin. And he said, we pull it across there so that we don't have to do a skin graft, because then you will be in strife. And I said, okay. And when we finished, he came into the theatre where I was in post-op, and he said, you've dodged a bullet, son. There was no stretch. He said, we stretched it across. There was no graft required. And then finally, when he showed me a photo, I said, you've put me with a white pointer. I've been taken by a shark here.
And you showed us that this morning, Ray, and it's healed up superbly.
Beautiful.
Yeah, well, you can because I know where it was. But if I show someone that doesn't know where it was, he's a genius, the way he was able to, do that with 88 stitches, and there's not a mark there. And of course, he instructed me to keep coming back, because I'm a 50% chance of another one sometime down the track. He said, so keep checking it. And I would, on the melanoma front, as I say with men's health and ladies' health, but mainly men's health, because you're pretty slack about doing things, you blokes, get your skin checked. Heart health, skin checked. All those things have to be done.
Blood pressure.
All that stuff.
Cholesterol.
Yeah,
yep.
Exactly.
Yes,
I know about cholesterol. I'm a bit of medication for that myself. I'm trying to behave, Professor, about what I eat, but it doesn't work. Apparently, my family, because my dad died of a heart attack at 46, manufacture too much cholesterol.
Yep, it's genetic.
Yeah, exactly. God bless you both, and thank you. It's
Thank
really
you,
lovely
Ray.
to see you both again.
Thanks,
okay, all
Ray.
the best. Thank you. Professor Richard Scolyer and Professor Georgina Long from the Melanoma Institute about a different type of cancer this time. It's 24 to 11.